When you hear that a victim's fingerprint was found on the murder weapon, you think you understand what that means. You think it means she touched it first. You think it means the weapon belonged to her. Something from her house, her kitchen, her life, taken from her hands and used against her. And in the case of Nadine Beaumont of Henlopen Crossing, Delaware, you would be right. The weapon was a cast-iron doorstop in the shape of a lighthouse. She had bought it herself at a craft fair in Rehoboth Beach in the summer of 1977, and set it at the bottom of her front door because the door had a tendency to swing shut in the wind, and she liked to leave it open on warm evenings to let the air through. She had handled it every day for 2 years. Her prints were on it the way your prints are, on everything you touch without thinking. The way you touch things that belong so fully to your ordinary life that you never imagine they could become something else. On the evening of March 22, 1979, that doorstop was found 40 feet from Nadine Beaumont's front porch, in the gravel of her driveway, and Nadine was found inside. Her fingerprint was on the weapon. His were not. And for 43 years, that absence, the clean, careful, deliberate absence of a second set of prints on an object that someone had carried 40 feet and set down in the dark, was the thing that told investigators exactly what kind of person they were looking for, and nothing at all about who he was. That is not a story about evidence that failed. That is a story about patience, the patience of a family that waited, the patience of a detective who retired and unretired himself, and the patience of a fingerprint database that grew larger every year until the right name finally appeared in it. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to Henlopen Crossing, because to understand what was lost on that March evening, you first have to understand who Nadine Beaumont was. Henlopen Crossing was a small, unincorporated community in Sussex County, Delaware, the lower, quieter half of a small state that most people drove through on their way to the beach and didn't look at sideways. It sat inland from the coast by about 12 miles, in flat country that grew soybeans and corn and occasional peach orchards, and it had the particular character of a place where people had stayed because they wanted to, not because they had nowhere else to go. A post office, a volunteer fire company, a Methodist church that had been on the same foundation since 1887, and enough families with the same last names on the mailboxes that the county phone book read like a genealogy chart. In March of 1979, when the fields were still brown and the wind off the bay had a cold edge that wouldn't leave until May, it was the kind of place where a light on in a neighbor's window at an unusual hour was worth noticing, and where neighbors noticed things. Nadine Beaumont was 44 years old. She had lived in Henlopen Crossing for 19 years, having moved there from Wilmington in 1960 when she married her husband, Curtis, and taken a job as a bookkeeper for a farm supply cooperative that served 3 counties. Curtis Beaumont had died of a heart attack in 1974, leaving Nadine alone in the white clapboard house they had shared for 14 years. Alone, but not lonely, which is a distinction that everyone who knew her would later make, because she was precisely the kind of person who filled a house with enough life that it never felt empty. She had 2 daughters, both grown, Linda, who was 23 and lived in Wilmington, and Patricia, who was 20 and attending Delaware Technical College in Georgetown. She had a vegetable garden behind the house that she started from seed every February on the kitchen windowsill. She had a CB radio in the living room, left over from when Curtis used it for the volunteer fire company, that she sometimes used to talk to a neighbor 2 miles down the road when the phone lines were icy. She made a pound cake from her mother's recipe every time someone in the community had a loss, and she had been making that cake for so many years that, after her own death, the people she had brought it to would describe it with a specificity that grief sharpens, The vanilla, the lemon zest, the way it was always wrapped in a clean dish towel. She had also, in the previous year, begun keeping her front door open on warm evenings, propped with the cast-iron lighthouse from the Rehoboth Beach Craft Fair. She liked the sound of the evening coming in. She liked to sit at the kitchen table after dinner with a library book and a cup of tea, and feel the air move through the house. On the evening of March 22, 1979, she had a pot of soup on the stove, a library book open on the table, and the front door latched closed because the March wind was too cold for open doors. The lighthouse doorstop was at the base of the door, as always, because she hadn't moved it just because the season changed. That detail mattered. That detail mattered enormously. Linda Beaumont called her mother at 7:30 that evening from her apartment in Wilmington and got no answer. She called again at 9. No answer. She called the neighbor with the CB radio, a woman named Vera Hutchins, and asked if Vera had seen any lights on. Vera looked out her window. The lights were on. She said she'd drive over. Vera Hutchins found the front door of Nadine's house open, not ajar. Open, the lighthouse doorstop was gone from its position. The soup was on the stove, still warm, turned down to low. Vera called the Sussex County Sheriff's Department from Nadine's telephone at 9:22. The responding deputy found the lighthouse doorstop in the driveway at 9:41, before he had entered the house. He marked its position. He noted in his report that it appeared to have been set down deliberately, not thrown or dropped. He noted that the gravel around it showed no signs of a struggle at that location. He entered the house at 9:43. Nadine Beaumont was found in the kitchen. The soup was still on the low burner. The library book was still open on the table. Her reading glasses were on the floor beside the chair, folded, as if she had removed them carefully before something happened that did not allow careful actions. The Sussex County Sheriff's Department processed the scene over the following 2 days. The doorstop was photographed in situ, collected, and submitted to the Delaware State Police Forensic Lab. Fingerprint analysis of the doorstop identified 1 partial print and 2 full prints, all belonging to Nadine Beaumont. No additional prints were identified. Whoever had carried it from the door to the driveway had left nothing of themselves on it. The lead investigator was a Sussex County Sheriff's detective named Raymond Cook. He was 51, a methodical, spare-spoken man who had worked violent crimes in rural Delaware for 20 years, and who told his supervisor in the first week of the Beaumont investigation that this was not an impulsive crime. He said the absence of fingerprints on the doorstop told him exactly that. Whoever had used it had known enough to be careful, or had been careful by instinct, and either way it meant something about the kind of person they were looking for. Raymond Cook interviewed 47 people. He focused first on the question of who had known Nadine well enough to know the layout of her house, where the doorstop would be, which door it propped, what her evening routines were. He focused second on who had been in the area of Henlopen Crossing on the evening of March 22nd. The community was small enough that almost everyone had an account of their evening, given freely and corroborated easily by the density of neighbors who saw each other constantly. He found one gap. A man named Warren Tillis, 38 years old, who drove a feed truck for one of the farm suppliers that contracted with the cooperative where Nadine worked. He serviced several farms in the Henlopen Crossing area and passed by Nadine's road regularly on his routes. He told Cook he had been home that evening by 6. His wife confirmed it. But a neighbor who lived at the intersection of the main county road and Nadine's road, a retired farmer named Alton Greer, who spent his evenings on his porch watching the road the way men of his generation watched roads, told Cook that he had seen a truck consistent with the cooperative's delivery vehicles pass by heading toward Nadine's road at approximately 7:45. He could not read the plates. He could not say with certainty it was Tillis's truck. He said he saw it go in. He didn't see it come out, because he went inside at 8. Raymond Cook requested a voluntary fingerprint comparison from Warren Tillis. Tillis provided it, without resistance, in March 1979. His prints were compared against the partial and full prints on the doorstop. The comparison yielded no match. There were no additional prints to compare them to. Tillis was eliminated as a suspect. The investigation continued for 14 months. Cook identified no further suspects. The Delaware State Police assisted with a geographic analysis of known offenders in Sussex and Kent counties. Nothing connected. In May 1980, the case was reclassified as inactive. The doorstop remained in evidence storage. The 3 fingerprints on its surface, Nadine's 3 fingerprints, were catalogued, photographed, and filed. Linda Beaumont attended every update meeting the Sheriff's Department offered for the first 4 years. Then, the meetings stopped being offered. She began writing letters. By 1989, 10 years had passed. Linda Beaumont was 33 years old and working as a legal secretary in Wilmington, and she had developed a habit that she later described to a reporter as feeling less like a choice and more like a condition. She could not let a week go by without doing something in her mother's name. Some weeks that meant calling the Sheriff's Department. Some weeks it meant driving down to Henlopen Crossing to visit her mother's grave and then sitting in the driveway of the clapboard house, now owned by strangers, and reminding herself what the house looked like when her mother was in it. Some weeks it meant writing to Delaware's Attorney General, whose office changed every 4 to 8 years, but whose address she had memorized. Patricia, the younger daughter, had moved to Virginia in 1983. She and Linda spoke every Sunday. Patricia dealt with their mother's death differently, more quietly, more internally, less by action than by memory. But she never discouraged Linda. She told Linda once that Linda was doing the part of the grief that needed to be done out loud, and that she was grateful someone was doing it. Raymond Cook retired from the Sussex County Sheriff's Department in 1991. Before he cleared out his office, he sat with a colleague and went through his open cases one more time. He said the Beaumont case would not leave him. He said the doorstop was the thing, the clean doorstop with her prints and no one else's, placed neatly in the gravel, 40 feet away. He said whoever did that wasn't panicking. He said that kind of control didn't disappear from a person. He said he hoped it caught up with whoever it was before he died. By 1997, the clapboard house had been sold a 3rd time. The vegetable garden Nadine had started from seed was a lawn. The CB radio had been gone since 1984, when Linda and Patricia cleared the house. The lighthouse doorstop remained in the Sussex County Sheriff's evidence storage. A property manager reviewed the inventory in 2001 and flagged it for potential destruction. Storage space was limited, and the case had been inactive for 20 years. A clerk, reviewing the flag, noted the case status and rerouted the item to long-term evidence hold. The doorstop was moved to a secondary facility outside Dover. It is worth pausing on that for a moment. A clerk made a correct call about a piece of evidence in a 20-year-old inactive case, and that decision mattered. What they did in that moment, without knowing it, was keep the case alive. In 2007, Delaware joined the National AFIS expansion, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, a federal database that stores and compares fingerprint records from law enforcement agencies across all 50 states and allows jurisdictions to cross-reference prints that could never have been compared in the era of manual analysis. The fingerprints from the Beaumont doorstop were digitized and entered into the system as part of a statewide cold case evidence review conducted between 2007 and 2010. Nothing came back immediately. The database was large, but not yet large enough. The relevant print was not yet in it. This is the part that takes patience to understand. Fingerprint databases grow continuously. Every arrest, every booking, every court proceeding that requires fingerprinting adds to the pool. A print that has no match today may have a match tomorrow, or in 5 years, or in 22, when the person it belongs to is finally arrested for something, anything, and their prints enter the system for the first time. The system doesn't get tired. It keeps looking. If you've stayed with this story through 43 years of waiting, we see you, and we're grateful. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Stories like Nadine's take weeks to research and piece together, and your support is what keeps this channel going. Now, let's get back to Linda Beaumont. In February of 2022, a 67-year-old man named Gerald Mast was arrested in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, on charges of assault and disorderly conduct following an altercation at a bar in Annapolis. He was booked at the county jail. His fingerprints were taken as part of standard booking procedure. Those prints were entered into the Maryland State Police database, which feeds automatically into the National AFIS system. The comparison ran overnight. On the morning of February 19, 2022, a detective with the Delaware State Police Cold Case Unit named Josephine Aldrich received an automated flag on the Beaumont case. She opened the notification. She read it twice. She sat back in her chair and said, quietly, to no one in particular, 43 years. The partial print recovered from the underside of the lighthouse doorstop in March 1979. The only print that had not been identified as Nadine Beaumont's. The partial print that Raymond Cook's 1979 analysis had been unable to match to any known individual, had returned a hit. Gerald Mast. The partial print from the doorstop matched the left index finger of the man currently sitting in a holding cell in Annapolis, Maryland, for getting into a fight at a bar. Josephine Aldrich spent 11 days building the connection before she moved. She pulled Mast's background. He was 67, a retired plumber from the eastern shore of Maryland. He had lived in several locations in Delaware and Maryland between 1975 and 1985, including a rental property in Georgetown, Delaware, 22 miles from Henlopen Crossing, between 1977 and 1980. He had no prior criminal record. He had a wife and 2 adult sons. He attended a Methodist church in Queenstown, Maryland. He was, on paper, the most ordinary man she had seen in 20 years of cold case work. She pulled the cooperative's delivery records from 1979. It took 3 weeks, through a county agricultural archive that had digitized its older holdings in 2018. The records showed that a third-party contract hauler, not one of the cooperative's own drivers, had covered a route through the Henlopen Crossing area in February and March of 1979, during a period when the regular driver was recovering from surgery. The hauler had been contracted through an Eastern Shore Farm Services company. Gerald Mast had worked for that company in 1979. Alton Greer, who had watched the road from his porch on the evening of March 22, 1979, had died in 1998. But his account was in Raymond Cook's report, and it sat there all these years, a truck, heading toward Nadine's Road at 7:45. Going in, not seen coming out. Josephine Aldrich called Raymond Cook on March 8, 2022. He was 83 years old and living in Milford, Delaware. She told him about the print. She told him about the route records. She told him about the Georgetown rental. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The doorstop." He set it down. No panic, no rush. He just set it down. "Yes," she said. "That's who he is," Cook said. The arrest warrant for Gerald Mast was executed on April 4, 2022. At his home in Queenstown, Maryland, he was in the garden when the detectives arrived. Maryland State Police and Sussex County Sheriffs working together. Josephine Aldrich present. He turned when he heard the cars. He did not run. He did not speak. He stood in his garden with a trowel in his hand and watched them come toward him. And the expression on his face was described by two of the three detectives present as something very close to resignation. Like a man who had been waiting a long time for something he always expected and had never entirely believed wouldn't come. Gerald Mast was charged with murder in the first degree. He pleaded not guilty. His trial lasted 9 days in the fall of 2023. The evidence was methodical and accumulating. The fingerprint match, the route records, the Georgetown rental placing him in the area, the cooperative's logs, Alton Greer's documented account from 44 years earlier. His defense offered no alternative explanation for the partial print on the underside of the doorstop. On November 14, 2023, the jury returned a guilty verdict after 6 hours of deliberation. Gerald Mast was sentenced to life in prison. He is 68 years old. He never explained himself. He has not spoken publicly about Nadine Beaumont. He sat through his sentencing with the same stillness he had shown in his garden in April. The same stillness Raymond Cook had identified in 1979 as the sign of a man who did not panic. The jury saw that stillness in court and understood exactly what it meant. Linda Beaumont was 67 years old on the day of the verdict, the same age Gerald Mast had been when his prints entered the national database. She had been fighting for that verdict for 44 years, since before she was 30. She sat in the courtroom with Patricia beside her, and with Patricia's daughter, a young woman named Claire, who had grown up hearing the story of a grandmother she had never met, but knew through a pound cake recipe and a garden that no longer existed, and a lighthouse doorstop that had sat in evidence storage for longer than Claire had been alive. When the verdict was read, Linda did not cry immediately. She looked at the jury. She looked at Gerald Mast's back, turned toward the front of the courtroom, entirely still. She looked at Patricia's hand in her own. She said, later, that she was looking for something to feel that she could name, and that what she found was simpler than she expected. It was just the word, done. Raymond Cook died in January 2024, 6 weeks after the verdict. He had learned about it from Josephine Aldrich, who drove to Milford to tell him in person the afternoon it came in. He thanked her. He said he was glad she had called him in March. She said she knew he would want to know. He said yes. He said he had wanted to know for 43 years. Nadine Beaumont was 44 years old. She had a pot of soup on the stove. She had a library book open on the table. She had a front door she liked to leave open on warm evenings, propped with a cast-iron lighthouse she'd bought herself at a craft fair in Rehoboth, because she liked the way the air moved through her house. She had 2 daughters who knew her pound cake by heart, and a neighbor who drove over when the phone went unanswered. She had a whole life arranged exactly the way she wanted it. The lighthouse is still in the evidence archive in Delaware. It will be there for as long as the case record requires it. After that, Linda has said she would like it back. She has said she would set it at the bottom of a door somewhere. She hasn't decided which door, the way her mother always did. Before you go, we want to hear from you. What do you think about a fingerprint database that spent 22 years waiting for the right person to make one wrong move and walk into a booking room? Does Gerald Mast's silence, no explanation, no statement, nothing offered to Nadine's family after 44 years, make the verdict feel like more or less of a resolution? And what does it mean to you that a single clerk's decision in a county storage facility in 2001 kept that doorstop from being destroyed and kept this verdict possible? Justice found Nadine Beaumont after 44 years. It found her because a doorstop was preserved, a database kept growing, and a detective drove to Milford to tell an 83-year-old man the news in person. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe that truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe. More cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.